If I were to ask you what makes football special compared to other sports, what would you say? Maybe something about its rich history or its simplicity to play, but my answer would be the unlimited creativity that it encourages. Every sport offers moments of inspiration, the last-minute sprint finish or the perfectly timed overtake. Yet football seems to breed an unparalleled number of unexpected moments of genius. And perhaps no other player personifies this creative spirit quite like Artur Antunes Coimbra, or as you know him, Zico. But before we delve into the depths of this exceptional player's career, his triumphs, and importantly his defeats, it's crucial to journey back to his roots to understand where exactly he emerged. Ladies and gentlemen, we are taking a trip to Brazil. In the world of football, Brazil stands as the unrivaled greatest. By nearly every metric imaginable, Brazil are the ultimate footballing nation. They boast the most Confederations Cup victories, and of course they are the side who have won the World Cup the most times at 5. It's safe to say when it comes to international glory, no team in the annals of football history shines brighter than Brazil. But what makes them so good? Well, me, along with most people, I think, would say their creativity. From a very early age, children playing on the streets of Rio or Sao Paulo are encouraged by their environment to think outside the box or defy convention. If football is the most creative of all sports, then Brazil is the football of football. As for the national team itself, you could put a lot of their success down to what I would call the first Brazilian golden age, which unfolded during the 1950s and 60s. This period witnessed the emergence of legendary talents, iconic matches, and a unique brand of free-flowing football that relied on players' intuitions and of course their creativity. It left an indefinable mark on the global stage. Every team wanted to play like Brazil. Few, if any, managed it. The defining moment of Brazil's first golden age was the 1958 World Cup, when Brazil claimed their first ever world title. It was a triumph that reverberated across the nation and beyond, capturing the hearts and minds of aspiring footballers, like a young Artur Antunes Coimbra, who was probably watching or listening to this historic event. This moment likely played a profound role in inspiring the young Artur to pursue his dreams and etch his name into football history. Nowadays we know that he did just that, but in the early stages of Artur's career, his success was far from certain. On the 3rd of March 1953, José Coimbra and Matilde Silva Costa gave birth to their 6th and final child. They did not know it at the time, but they had just changed the course of Brazil and football history. His name was Arthur. Growing up in Rio de Janeiro, Arthur was immersed in football from day one. By the age of 6, he was already showcasing his talents on the pitch, playing for a futsal team with his older brothers. Despite being the youngest and smallest player by a considerable margin, his diminutive stature did not bother him. In fact, it fueled his determination. He consistently outperformed kids twice his age, with his amazing technical abilities a defining trait that would resonate throughout his career. As his skills on the pitch continued to impress, he became a well-known figure in the surrounding neighborhood, and earned the nickname Artuzinho, which translates to Little Arthur, once again reflecting his small physical stature. Over time, Artuzinho evolved into Zico, which then itself evolved into Zico, the iconic name that we know today. At the age of 14, it was finally decided that Zico was ready to take the step into professional football. Initially, the plan was for him to join his brother's club, America, a smaller team in Rio de Janeiro where he had scheduled a trial. However, fate had other plans for the young prodigy. Just a week before his scheduled trial with America, Zico played a game where he scored 9 goals. It was an outstanding performance, which caught the attention of a local reporter who approached Zico's father with a different option. Instead of joining America, he suggested that Zico try out for Flamengo, one of the biggest clubs in Brazil. Choosing Flamengo over his brother's team was undoubtedly a risk, but Zico's father, a huge Flamengo supporter, gave his wholehearted blessing for his son to pursue his dream. It turned out to be the right decision, as Zico would pass his trial and make it in. However, the start of Zico's journey was not without its challenges. His small stature, which had earned him his nickname, began to pose a significant hindrance as football grew more physical. And so to overcome this obstacle, Zico underwent an intense diet and training regimen to build his physique. Through sheer hard work and determination, he transformed himself into a valuable asset for the Flamengo youth side. After an impressive record of 81 goals in 116 games, Zico earned a well-deserved promotion to the Flamengo first team. One of the greatest footballing careers in history was about to begin. By this time, Zico had come to the attention of the Brazilian national team, and in 1972 he was called up for the Olympic qualifiers, where he scored the goal against Argentina, which meant Brazil would qualify. However, despite these efforts, Zico was not called up for the actual 72 Munich games. Zico took this personally and was so devastated by the rejection of his home country that he quit football temporarily, not training with Flamengo for 10 straight days. But luckily he was convinced by his brothers that at this point giving up was not an option. By 1973, Zico was a fully fledged starter for Flamengo, and by 74 the 21-year-old was one of the team's best players. For Flamengo, Zico's role was that of an attacking midfielder, or number 10. A number 10 is one of the most respected positions in football, and is traditionally associated with creative and skillful players. At their best, they are the conductor of a team's attack, linking the midfield to the offensive players. For basketball viewers, if there are any, I would call them football's version of a point guard. What I find so special about the number 10 role is the best players in history seem to gravitate towards playing it. Cruyff, Maradona, Pele, Baggio, Platini, even Messi can be considered to play a similar role, especially in the latter half of his career. The reason I propose for this number 10 supremacy is that it is the position in which players can showcase their skills while still exerting the most influence possible on the game. A great number 10 can elevate an entire team's performance, and that is exactly what Zico did for Flamengo. Over the next 5 seasons, Zico showcased his talent by scoring an impressive 158 goals in just 221 appearances. This level of output is nothing short of astounding, especially for an attacking midfielder. In today's footballing world, if a striker achieved these numbers, we would consider him among the world's best. Zico did this as a midfielder. But what truly defined Zico in this period was his prowess in taking free kicks. His dedication and practice, along with a lot of natural ability, had honed this skill to perfection. Whenever Flamengo received a free kick in striking distance, an electric anticipation would go through the stadium, as it was more likely than not that Zico was going to score. But it wasn't all plain sailing. Despite Zico's brilliant individual numbers, by 1978 he had yet to capture Flamengo's first title. A lot of this can be put down to the competitiveness of the Brazilian league in that era. Unlike today when European leagues take the spotlight, in the 70s South American leagues were considered just as strong, if not stronger. This was down to the preference of top players to stay in their home country for club football. And because Brazil was home to some of the best footballers, the Brazilian league was one of the strongest in the world. However, 1978 marked a turning point in Zico's career. The Brazilian national team had realised their mistake of leaving him out all those years ago, and so Zico was called up for the 1978 World Cup. Zico would now be standing shoulder to shoulder with his fierce competitors instead of against them. It was the first time he was part of a team that was favoured to win something. But unbeknownst to him at the time, it would also be his first taste of failure. The World Cup means a lot to many countries, but no country has a relationship with the World Cup quite like Brazil. Obviously they have won it the most times, but they also have some of the most memorable losses in the history of the tournament. 1950 is perhaps the worst of the bunch. Brazil had entered the final game of the 1950 World Cup only needing to draw versus a much inferior Uruguay side. The nation was so confident that Brazilian newspapers had printed articles claiming Brazilian victory the day before the game, and victory parades were held throughout the country right up until the start of the match. 90 minutes later, however, the Uruguayan underdogs had come out 2-1 victors. 220,000 Brazilian fans were reported to be watching live that day, the highest attended game ever. They all looked on in horror. It was even reported that numerous onlookers committed suicide by jumping off the terraces. To a lot of Brazilians, football and the World Cup is truly life and death. So as you can probably imagine, by the time the 1978 World Cup rolled around, Zico and Brazil would be feeling a lot of pressure. For this tournament, along with Germany, Brazil were favourites, meaning on paper they had a good chance of winning. Unfortunately for Zico, football isn't played on paper, and the 1978 World Cup is undoubtedly the most controversial World Cup in history. I am sure many would stop me there and suggest the 2002 World Cup as the more controversial, and I'm sure most people have seen the 2002 contest between Italy and South Korea. And if you haven't, I wouldn't recommend watching it unless you really want to punch a hole through your wall. But I would argue that the 1978 World Cup is worse. And it's funny because not many people know about it, but to start, we are going to need some serious context. To fully grasp the controversies surrounding this World Cup, we must first dive into the extensive circumstances surrounding the event, things that go beyond the football pitch. Just 2 years before this tournament in 1976, Argentina underwent a significant political upheaval, marked by a military coup. This backdrop significantly shaped the tournament and garnered criticism from participating nations. In fact, one of the best teams at the tournament, the Netherlands, considered pulling out. Many regarded the tournament as a politically motivated manipulation of sports, aimed at uniting a divided nation and showcasing Argentina to the world in a manner reminiscent of Hitler's Munich Games. Hungary's manager perfectly captured the sentiment, saying the success of Argentina is financially so important to the tournament. And there is a lot of evidence to suggest that foul play might have been involved, and the host nation Argentina might have received some external help. For instance, in the group stage, Argentina received the benefit of playing all their games at night, after their opponents had already played. People argued that this allowed them to gauge the results of their competitors and adjust their own game plan accordingly. Now just keep that in the back of your mind, it will come in useful soon, trust me. But now let's turn our attention back to Zico and Brazil, to see how they fared against this, let's say, complex backdrop. The 78 World Cup followed a format that included a group stage, followed by another group stage, with the winner of the latter group advancing to the final. Brazil navigated their way through the first group with relative ease, and found themselves in the second group alongside Poland, Peru, and the host nation, Argentina. Brazil's journey through this stage began with a dominant 3-0 win over Peru, a match in which Zico himself found the back of the net. Their second encounter was a tense 0-0 draw with Argentina. After the first two games, Brazil and Argentina were both tied at the top on 4 points, setting the stage for a decisive final match day. On the last day, Brazil would face Poland, winning comfortably with a 3-1 scoreline. Meanwhile, that evening, Argentina was set to play Peru, and this is where the controversy begins. As I mentioned earlier, Argentina were given the advantage of playing their games after their competitors. This proved beneficial as they knew exactly what result they needed and by how many goals. Brazil had finished with a goal difference of +5, meanwhile Argentina only had a goal difference of +2, meaning in their final game, Argentina had to beat Peru by at least 4 goals to secure their spot in the final. However, Peru were no pushover. They had won their previous group, which included formidable opponents such as the Netherlands, who themselves had just qualified for the final a few hours earlier. So, Argentina were faced with a daunting task. Not only did they have to beat a tricky Peru side, but they had to do it by 4 or more goals. I think a lot of people would agree that this seems a pretty impossible task. Or maybe not. Inconceivably, Argentina had beaten Peru 6-0 and somehow managed to top the group. But this surprising scoreline makes a little more sense when you take a closer look. First of all, Argentina had the advantage of playing their game after Brazil, and therefore they knew the exact goal difference required for qualification. Meaning in this case they had the advantage of knowing that they had to score a lot of goals. But the plot thickens even further. Mere minutes before kickoff, the president of Argentina enters the Peruvian locker room, accompanied by none other than former American Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. Their mission? To convey a message from Peruvian dictator Francisco Morales Bermudez. Now you might think this message would be an inspiring pep talk, rallying the Peruvian players to represent their nation with pride. However, what he said was far from that. The actual message centered around a so-called Argentine-Peruvian brotherhood, a concept that would take a curious turn just 10 days after Peru lost. 10 days after that controversial defeat, Argentina extended an extraordinary non-refundable credit to the Republic of Peru. Whilst we tend to avoid dabbling in conspiracies here at Nile Talk Sports, it's challenging not to raise an eyebrow at the sequence of events. A solid Peruvian team suffers an embarrassing defeat to Argentina, paving the way for Argentina to qualify for the World Cup final, all whilst being reminded of the significance of the brotherhood between the two countries. And days after the game, Argentina hands Peru an extraordinary gesture. Quite the intriguing series of events, wouldn't you say? In the end, Argentina would win that World Cup, but let's turn our attention back to Zico and his footballing journey, before the FBI decide to hunt me down and neutralise me. The aftermath of the 1978 World Cup held a different emotional tone to what Brazilians experienced in 1950. Instead of sheer sadness and exasperation, there was an overwhelming sense of disbelief and anger. Brazil felt deeply wronged, and Zico shared in this sentiment. But rather than letting this injustice consume him, it seemed to ignite a fierce determination within Zico, propelling him towards what would be the single greatest season of his illustrious career. They say that every good story has a climax, and for Zico the years following the 1978 World Cup were nothing short of remarkable. His 1979 season ranks among the finest seasons ever seen from a football player. Zico netted an astonishing 70 goals in just 56 games, a feat that still stands as the 6th highest goal tally in a calendar year to this day. Yet the numbers become even more staggering when you delve deeper into them. Zico accounted for 52.6% of his team's goals in that incredible season. In other words, whenever Flamengo scored, it was more likely than not that their legendary number 10 had put the ball in the back of the net. On top of this, Zico averaged a goal every 70.4 minutes of play, a mind-boggling statistic. For context, consider Lionel Messi's infamous 2012 season, widely regarded as the best year by a footballer in history. Messi scored 48.4% of his team's goals and averaged a goal every 68.2 minutes, not that far away from Zico's numbers in 1979. If this doesn't illustrate how exceptional Zico was, it's hard to imagine what will. Following that year, Flamengo would finally win their first league title, with Zico of course finishing as their top scorer. Following that year in 1981, they would secure an impressive double, winning both the league title and the Copa Libertadores, South America's equivalent of the European Cup. This success would earn Flamengo a coveted spot in the 1981 Intercontinental Cup, a game held between the champions of South America and the champions of Europe. It was a battle to determine the best club in the world, and Zico's opponents in this epic showdown were none other than 1980s Liverpool, one of the best club sides ever assembled. Between the years of 1977 and 1984, Liverpool won the European Cup 4 times, and in 1981 they were at the peak of their powers, fresh off a victory over Real Madrid in the European Cup final. For Zico and Flamengo, this was an imposing challenge. Today, one common criticism levelled against Brazilian greats is that they never tested themselves in Europe, that they never succeeded on the grandest stages of club football. The 1981 Intercontinental Cup was a chance for Zico to answer these critics. He was facing one of the greatest teams in European history after all. On this day, Zico did more than answer his critics. He silenced them. When discussing historical artistic figures, the term magnum opus is often used. It signifies their greatest work or achievement. While Zico may not have been a painter or writer, what he accomplished on that December day resembled art as much as any masterpiece ever created.
Para
Within just 34 minutes, the fate of the game was sealed. Flamengo had raced to a 3-0 lead and Liverpool's spirit had been utterly shattered. The defining moment came in the 12th minute when Zico displayed his magical touch. He lofted the ball over Liverpool defender Phil Thompson, finding striker Nunes in perfect stride, and Nunes calmly slotted the ball beyond Liverpool's keeper Bruce Grobbelaar. Ian Hargreaves, writing for the Liverpool Daily Post, aptly described the first goal as a shattering blow from which Liverpool never recovered. It turned out to be a prophecy. In the 34th minute, Zico stepped up to take a long-range free kick. However, this time it didn't result in one of his notorious set-piece goals. As Zico prepared to take the shot, a Flamengo player in the wall quickly moved aside, creating an opening. Grobbelaar was unsighted and could not handle Zico's powerful shot, spilling the ball right into the path of Flamengo player Adilio, who scored an easy finish. Flamengo were now leading 2-0, and Liverpool did try to claw their way back into the match. But 7 minutes later, the lethal combination of Zico and Nunes struck again. Zico split the Liverpool defence with a perfectly weighted pass, giving Nunes a one-on-one chance which he finished brilliantly. In the second half, Flamengo seemed content to control possession and protect their lead. Despite Liverpool's determined efforts, they could not break through Flamengo's defence, and the game ended with a resounding 3-0 victory for Flamengo. After the game, Zico would earn himself a well-deserved Man of the Match award. Although he did not find the back of the net himself, he had played a pivotal role in all 3 of Flamengo's goals. That game, Flamengo's manager Carpe Gianni had utilised Zico's versatility and had positioned him slightly deeper in midfield for tactical reasons. He said that we played Zico further back than usual, and though he did not score, he did most of the damage. After the game, Liverpool midfielder Graham Souness expressed his admiration for Zico, noting, "I wanted to see how he would react to a physical challenge, but I couldn't get close enough to him to find out." Even Liverpool defender Mark Lawrenson couldn't help but acknowledge Zico's brilliance on that day, describing him as sensational. With this victory, Zico had reached the pinnacle of club football, becoming both the best player and captain of the world's best team. Ever since his father had encouraged him to take that trial at Flamengo, Zico had been building towards this moment. His legacy was beginning to take shape, but there remained one significant void that needed to be filled: the ultimate prize in football, the World Cup. As the next World Cup loomed, Brazil sought revenge for the events of 1978. And this time they had assembled a super team, the likes of which the world had never seen. And so it would be different this time, right? If any of your family were around for the 1982 World Cup, ask them what they remember about it. I would almost guarantee that they would mention the 1982 Brazilian team before anything else, and if they didn't, they can't have been watching very closely. In my view, no other team in the history of football has managed to capture the hearts of so many fans worldwide. Whilst I wasn't alive to witness it, I can only imagine the adoration that team received was rivaled only by what Argentina experienced in 2022, but without any of the divisive rivalries that occasionally surfaced among Ronaldo fans. In 1982, if you were an enemy of this Brazilian side, you were in essence an enemy of football itself. The funny thing is, and I'm sure most of you already know this, but they were a failure. They didn't even make the semi-finals. Arguably the best football team ever assembled, loved by millions, did not make the Final Four. How could this happen? The reason is perhaps more simple than you might guess. Before the 1982 World Cup in Spain, Europe buzzed with rumours that something extraordinary was happening down in South America, particularly in Brazil. A year prior to the tournament, the continent got its first taste of what was to come. In May 1981, Brazil embarked on a 3-game tour of Europe, taking on some of the continent's toughest competitors in Germany, England and France. But this did not seem to bother Brazil as they went on to win all 3 of those games. What struck fans who witnessed this Brazilian team for the first time wasn't just how good they were, it was how effortlessly they played. This was a team that refused to resort to fouling or time wasting. All they wanted to do was play the beautiful game, and that is exactly what they did. While every player on that team possessed immense talent, much of the magic could be attributed to their four midfielders: Falcao, Cerezo, Socrates, and of course their crown jewel, Zico. Together they formed an almost mesmerizing midfield square, and when the ball was in their possession, spectators knew that something special was about to unfold. With their midfield, as well as every other unit firing on all cylinders, Brazil racked up an impressive record of 22 wins and only 2 losses before they once again took to the world stage. The 1982 World Cup format was similar to the 1978 World Cup, with 2 group stages before the knockouts. After a shaky start against the Soviet Union, Brazil would convincingly win all of their first 3 group stage games, with Zico scoring 3 of the goals. They appeared to be the clear best team heading into the second group stage, and even when they got drawn into a group of death with Italy and Argentina, they were expected to make it out. First of all, Brazil would play old enemies Argentina, who you will recall won the previous World Cup under, let's say, suspicious circumstances. They had also added a new weapon to their arsenal, a certain Diego Maradona. It would be Brazil's number 10 versus Argentina's. 11 minutes in, it would be Zico who would open the scoring after tapping in a parried free kick, but following this it was a relatively even first half. As the game went on, however, Brazil found their feet, scoring twice more, putting the game out of reach for their fiercest rivals. Despite Argentina getting one back late on, it was a dominant 3-1 Brazilian victory. In this instance at least, the battle of the number 10s had been won by Zico. Brazilian teammate Socrates later said that whilst he thought Maradona was more skillful than Zico, Zico was more visible and effective on the pitch. He would rather have Zico in his team. Following their victory over Argentina, Zico and Brazil were on cloud 9. Their path to the semi-finals seemed straightforward. A draw against a lackluster Italian side would secure their spot. Italy had struggled throughout the tournament, barely making it through the first group stage with 3 consecutive draws. Brazilian players had joked about wanting to face Italy before the groups had even been drawn, and now their wish had come true. But as the saying goes, be careful what you wish for, you might just get it. Despite needing just a draw to advance, Brazil approached the match aggressively. Free-flowing attacking football was ingrained in their style of play. However, Italy quickly exploited the gaps in Brazil's defence, and Italian striker Paolo Rossi headed home a cross just 5 minutes into the game. Brazil responded just 7 minutes later with a moment of Zico genius, as he set up Socrates for a composed finish. At this point, it would have been prudent for Brazil to manage the tempo of the game. After all, 2 goals had just been scored in a little over 10 minutes, and Brazil only needed a draw to progress. But restraint wasn't in their nature, and in the 25th minute, a misplaced pass from Cerezo was seized upon by Paolo Rossi, who scored to notch his 2nd goal of the match. In the second half, Brazil mounted another comeback, with midfielder Falcao scoring from outside the box in the 68th minute. They once again appeared to be on the verge of securing a spot in the semi-finals, if only they had stopped attacking. Watching this game when you know what happens is a similar experience to watching a horror movie. You watch as your favourite character goes into that dark room, and you know they're making a mistake, but there's nothing you can do. Brazil continued to play for the win, but in the 74th minute, Paolo Rossi again scored, and this time it was the killing blow. Brazil had lost 3-2 and were out of the World Cup. A team that had inspired so many people around the world had come to a shocking end. Brazil and Zico had once again fallen short. We can now say in retrospect, that July evening was more than just Italy versus Brazil. It pitted Brazil's instinctive fantasy football against Italy's pragmatic counter-attacking style. During that era, football was far from a solved puzzle. Different teams championed entirely distinct styles, vying for supremacy on the global stage. However, the 5th of July 1982 marked a turning point that would gradually reshape the football world into the more structured game we see today. While the transformation was more gradual than I am laying out, this moment was pivotal. Even Brazil, known for their flair and creativity, eventually realised the need to adapt their style to become champions once again. Their World Cup winning sides in 1994 and 2002 showcased some Brazilian brilliance. But any old enough Brazilian football fan will tell you that aesthetically, those teams couldn't hold a candle to the magic of the 1982 squad. It might sound like I'm criticising the pragmatic style of football that has evolved into what we see today, and in some ways I am. Admittedly, Italy's approach proved superior, but I'd be dishonest if I claimed that I believe football is better off for Brazil's loss. At the start of this video, I claimed what makes football special to me is the creativity that it encourages. Of course, today we still witness inspired players and moments on the pitch, and this still means football is special. I just sometimes think that if Brazil had won the World Cup, we might be experiencing more of these special moments. 1 year after the World Cup, Zico secured his third title with Flamengo. His beloved boyhood club had always welcomed him back with open arms. However, amidst the celebrations, behind the scenes, Flamengo was considering cashing in on their star player. To Zico's disappointment, he was sent to play for Italian club Udinese for the 1983-84 season. Zico's debut season with Udinese proved to be successful, and he went on to score 19 goals, just one behind French legend Michel Platini, who had played 4 more games due to a Zico injury. Despite his individual brilliance, Zico could only elevate Udinese to a 9th place finish in a fiercely competitive Serie A. The next season was worse for both Udinese and Zico, as the Brazilian's campaign was marred by injuries, limiting his impact on the pitch. Meanwhile, back in Brazil, Flamengo underwent a change in ownership and expressed a desire to bring Zico back home. After a couple of seasons showcasing his talents in Europe, Zico was ready to conclude his career at the one club he truly loved. There would be no drama, just Flamengo and football. Although there was a small mission to complete first, the tiny matter of the 1986 World Cup. The 1986 World Cup marked a final opportunity for an aging Zico to lead his national team to glory. At the age of 33, it was now or never. The team he played with was extremely similar to the 1982 World Cup side, but 4 years of time had taken its toll. Age had caught up with them. Brazil were beset by injuries and had lost the creative spark that had made them so formidable in '82. Zico himself was still nursing a serious injury from a horrific tackle he suffered that season and was primarily used as a substitute. In hindsight, he admitted that he probably wasn't fit enough to play at all. Despite these challenges, Brazil started the 1986 World Cup strongly, winning all of their group stage matches to finish top of the group. Unlike the previous 2 World Cups that Zico had played in, there would be no second group stage. It was straight to single elimination knockouts. Just 4 games now stood between Zico and football's ultimate prize. The first hurdle was Poland, who had actually finished 3rd at the previous World Cup, a better result than Brazil. However, Brazil had little trouble dispatching them with a resounding 4-0 victory. 1 down, 3 to go. The next challenge would be a much tougher France side. The crown jewel of the French team, their Zico you could say, was none other than Michel Platini. Coincidentally, he was also wearing the number 10. 4 years after the Maradona vs Zico showdown, another battle of the number 10s seemed imminent. However, it didn't quite unfold that way. Zico was still grappling with injuries and unable to start the game. His impact would have to come from the subs bench. The first half of the game was fiercely contested, with both teams displaying a potential to win. Brazil had initially gotten off to a strong start, finding the net after just 17 minutes. But just 4 minutes before half-time, Platini would equalise. This balance would continue into the second half, leaving the outcome of the game uncertain. Brazil, searching for inspiration, turned to the one person they had always relied upon to provide a spark. In the 71st minute, Zico entered the game. No one knew it then, but this would be his last ever game for Brazil. Almost immediately, Zico set up teammate Branco, who earned himself a penalty. And of course, Brazil entrusted their number 10 to take the spot kick. In this moment, Zico had a chance to redeem his past failures. The disappointments of 1978 and 82 could be forgotten with a successful penalty. But fate had a different plan.
The goalkeeper saved it, and they couldn't put the rebound in. Joe Bax is the hero.
Unfortunately, it wouldn't be Zico's day. It never was when it came time for the World Cup. The game would continue to extra time and then penalties, which Brazil subsequently lost. Zico would score his penalty in the shootout, but no one remembers this. Brazilian fans remember the miss. Even to this day, they remember it. That is the moment a lot of Brazilians associate with Zico. Not his goals, his assists, that one penalty miss. Scapegoating is a term often used in sports. It's when a fanbase will blame the failure of an entire team on an individual. In my opinion, there isn't a much better example of a scapegoat than Zico in '86. Zico returned to Brazil as one of the most hated men in the country. Everyone in Brazil blamed him for that loss, apart from Flamengo fans, of course, who continued to embrace him, even in the face of failure. Zico would return to Flamengo once more, spending 3 more years with the club. His final match with the club took place in December 1989, a 5-0 victory. He concluded his time with the club, to which he shared such a special bond, boasting 731 appearances and 508 goals. To this day, he has scored double what the next highest scoring player has. When I look at Zico's career as a whole, I am first of course struck with awe at his stats, skill, and overall brilliance. But this quickly subsides to puzzlement. How can the career of such a successful player contain so much failure? Sometimes football careers are defined by a few moments. You could put Zico's down to 3 games. One was the game that knocked him out in 1978, the World Cup game between Argentina and Peru, which he did not even have the opportunity to play in. And the game versus France in 1986, he only got to play half. Zico didn't win the World Cup, but I would say that's the World Cup's bad luck. With players like Zico, I think you have to look past the singular moments and look at what he represented to the sport as a whole. Football, they say, is a beautiful game. It's a canvas where artists once painted masterpieces, and it's a stage where legends like Zico left an indelible mark. But today, as we reminisce about the magic of the past, we're reminded that there will never be another like him. Zico embodied the number 10. He was a symbol of creativity and style that seemed to define an era which many consider as the golden age of the sport. Fast forward to today and you'll notice a shift. The number 10, once worn by artists like Zico, has transformed into something else. The game has evolved, becoming a highly tactical, efficient machine, where every player is a cog in a well-oiled engine. To me, the game is less beautiful, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's worse, it's just different. Today, football is about precision, pressing, and teamwork. It's about the collective, where the brilliance of one may be overshadowed by the brilliance of many. The past had its charm, and players like Zico were the embodiment of that charm. They played with a flair and passion that ignited the hearts of fans worldwide, so it's natural to feel a sense of nostalgia for those days, where football was a different kind of beautiful. But let's not forget that today's game has its own benefits. It focuses more on adaptability, oftentimes forcing players to play a more well-rounded role. It's about the pursuit of excellence in new ways. It's different, but it's still kind of beautiful in its own right. So as we reflect on Zico's legacy and his unique impact on the evolution of the game, let's not lament what was, but celebrate what is. Football, whether in the past or the present, will always be a source of joy, inspiration and wonder, and our friend Zico would have it no other way.